Hey there, I'm Sarita, and you're about to experience the modern approach to well-being where you get to establish the best and most important relationship you will ever have, the one with yourself. I'm on a mission to help you declutter energy and reclaim your power so you can be a magnet to what you desire. If you're looking for the optimal blend of mindset and healing, you're in the right place. My goal in this podcast is to share tools, resources, and practices that will help you along your healing journey. I'm so excited to be here with you today, so welcome to Back to Here with Sarita. Let's get started. Hey you, I'm so glad that you are here again for another episode with me, your host, Sarita. We have a wonderful self-embrace story today, and I absolutely love these episodes because I get to connect with some amazing women and hear their journeys of self-love and healing. So today's guest, I have Leah Forney. She's a 7-time published author, sexual assault survivor and advocate, transformational speaker, and purpose-driven architect. She works with aspiring women entrepreneurs to help them identify the barriers that have them stuck instead of walking in their God-given purpose. She's also the CEO of Purposely Faithful LLC. Welcome, Leah. I'm so excited to have you here and talk with you and connect with you and hear your story.
I'm so excited to be here.
Amazing. And before we started the episode, we're just kind of talking about where we're located. Leah's in the East Coast. I'm in the West Coast. It's still kind of, if you're watching this on video, you can kind of see the difference. There's kind of more of a bright light where I'm at because it's still a little bit earlier. So, yes. So loving that. And Leah, so I would love what you have such a amazing background and an eclectic background, I should say, and I emphasize that 7 times published author. That is phenomenal. That is so cool. Before we get into like all the things, tell me a little bit about that. I'm sure everyone's like, wow, seven times. Talk about that. I want to hear.
Yeah, so it's funny, and when you were reading that, I was like, oh man, I forgot to update. And so I'm 8 times now because I released my 8th book in September of this
Congrats.
year. Man, the journey to becoming an author actually was started back in, well, I would say it started in childhood. So I'll take you all the way back, Sarita. So childhood, I grew up without my parents. My mom battled with drug addiction. My dad was an alcoholic and in and out of prison. So I was raised by my maternal grandparents and my aunt. And so as a young kid, you can like imagine the feelings around abandonment and rejection and kind of feeling like, well, why didn't my parents want me? You know, I grew up in Queens, New York, where a lot of my friends had 2-parent households. You know, they were going home to mom and dad every day, and I was going home to grandma, grandpa, and auntie. So I kind of felt left out. I felt like a sore thumb. You know, like I was just way different. And so because I didn't really know what to do with my emotions at the time, I found myself in a lot of physical altercations, arguing, screaming, fighting. And my grandmother's biggest fear was I was either going to end up dead really early or like my dad, incarcerated. And so I took to writing as a way of escape. I do not think that at the time I was thinking, oh, one day I'm going to be an author. In fact, I know I wasn't thinking that. I just needed a way to like process how I was feeling as a young kid. And so writing was my way of just like creating this fantasy world so that when people did ask about my parents, I had an elaborate story. Like my dad was a top secret agent in the CIA, you know, like something other than my dad was incarcerated and I don't really have a relationship with him. And so writing was the way of escape. And so fast forward, I would say like 2014, 2015, I'm a very spiritual person. I believe in God. And in my prayer time, God had revealed to me that I needed to write a book. And I was like, who's writing a book? And what are we writing a book about? Like, you know, it was one of those like moments in time where I'm just like, you're kidding, right? But he kept saying it. Like, it was one of those, like, he would not stop saying, you need to write a book. So then finally I was like, okay, God, if I'm supposed to write this book, what am I writing a book about? And so he was just like, your life. And I'm like, yeah, you're gonna have to give me a little bit more than that, sir.
More specific.
Like, and specifically, he wanted me to write about my relationship with my mom. And so at that time, I was living in the state of North Carolina, and one of my really close friends and editor to this day, she was a Christian author, and she was like, well, I'll help you through the book writing process. So I wrote my first manuscript, and it was like probably as real and raw as I could possibly be. And I remember her sitting me down, and she was like, Leah, you're a storyteller. And I'm like, who's this? Like, who? And she's like, no, seriously. Like, she was like, the way you paint pictures with your words, like, has anybody ever told you that? And I was like, no. And so we go through the process of the writing process and getting it edited. And it was funny because I named my first book Unapologetically Me. And it was the first time I was really living, owning, and walking in my truth. That's literally the whole title. And I was like, okay. So she says to me, she's like, well, we should put a picture of you on the cover. So again, not knowing nothing about the book writing process, Sarita, I started sending her like my best selfies in my phone. It was so funny. And she's like, no, you need like professional photos. And I was like, oh, like a photo shoot. And she's like, yeah. I'm like, I didn't know these things. So we do the photo shoot. We pick the picture for the cover. And I tell you, I learned that when we tell our stories, we think it's for us, but really it's for other people. And so that book came out April 1st, 2017. And I always tell people, when you're doing anything for God, it's never one and done. It's always something else. So he started with one. I was cool with one. I was like, bucket list, author, check. But there was more that was on the inside of me. And so I released 4 of them during the pandemic. And my 8th one, which is now titled Born to Be Unbound, is literally the first book that I've written from a place of healing. So people get a real deep inside look of what my healing journey was like for the last 4 years.
Oh my gosh, that's so amazing. Obviously, the higher powers of that be had a bigger plan for you than just that one book.
Yeah.
That is amazing. And how I love something that you brought up, and this is something that I believe more people are discovering, the power of pen to paper. Having that somatic practice of writing things out, journaling things out.
Yeah.
Regardless of who's going to see it, it would be amazing if other people see it, because as you say, we do things for ourselves and we realize that it's actually so much bigger than us. Like, that's the beauty of just being human in this existence and like in this spiritual space, is like that we have so much more to offer than just like this thing for ourselves. Like, we are a gift to everybody. And the power of pen to paper, just that process of releasing, is so transformative and so empowering. And it's just, I like that you said processing like emotions, because it's such a great way to get all the clutter out of your head onto a place. And I love how journaling or writing, especially when we're doing it a little bit more on the private side, the pen, the paper is in no judgment. Like, there's nothing judging you in that moment. So it's like you can say whatever it is that's on your heart or on your mind. And it's such a great way to just release.
Yeah, it's very therapeutic. I tell people all the time, I'm actually one of those people that have like 50 million journals. It's so funny because my boyfriend, he'll be like, if you buy another journal, and I'll find any reason to buy a journal. I'm like, oh, it's cute. Let me go buy it. But
I love
like,
journals.
I'm one of those people that have like a notebook literally almost everywhere in my house, like by my bed, because you just never know when inspiration will strike, creativity will strike, or you just have a moment when you're like, oh, that was good. I need to write that down. So I'm all for writing how you feel and processing it.
I fully agree. We are constantly downloading things, downloading information, absorbing information, like listening. I mean, just our brain, like I I don't remember the percentage, but it's a ridiculous amount. Like just being exposed per day, our brain gets so much that our brain is actually functioning to filter out information because we just get system overload, right? So there's a reason why that this process, yeah, like you said, is very therapeutic, and it's a way for us to just like get rid of the excess. And we never know when we're gonna get these spats of great downloads. So
Yeah.
I love it, love it, love it. So Leah, something that you and I actually talked about before when we were first connecting is this your self love story, and a lot of it has to do, I mean, the healing, you brought up the healing a little bit within like your last book, and part of that process was going through a very traumatic incident that unfortunately is so much more common than I would like to admit, and I'm sure our society would like to admit. And being a sexual assault survivor is that pain has been turned into like empowerment for you, and it's become this like really big self-love journey, not only through just the experience and what you went through, but also like being an advocate for that. I know this is a very deep topic, a very like it can be a very uncomfortable topic for some people, but I love that you are in the space and talking about this openly, because it allows other women to, and men to have these discussions. So if you can share a little bit about that, I would love our audience and people listening to hear that part of your story.
Yeah, so I will start by saying I've been sexually assaulted 3 times in my life. The first 2 times I was a teenager, and like many young girls and even young men, like the shock of it all, you just don't know what to do. You don't know who to talk to. You don't say anything, especially for a lot of women of color, people of color. Like, we're automatically, the first thing that comes in our mind is who's going to believe us, right? Because society has said that, oh, if you wear your skirt too short, or you hang out at the bar, or you go here, go there, you were asking for it, right? So as a young girl being violated the first 2 times, I didn't tell a soul. I kept it to myself, and just tried to go on with life. And I did, went to college, grad school, all that good stuff. What made me report on the 3rd time was I got sexually assaulted January 27, 2013, right in my apartment in the state of North Carolina. I was new to the state. I met a guy. He seemed very, charming and nice, and he offered to take me to dinner. We had one date, but it was something about him that just, I was like, something's rough. I don't really like him. So I cut it off. Like, I just decided that he wasn't the guy that I wanted to get to know. Unfortunately, he didn't care for the rejection. So unbeknownst to me, he started stalking me. And so it was almost like literally everywhere that I went, he'd show up. And really in the most weirdest times. Like, I can remember like getting into a little car accident, and literally coming around the corner was the guy. And I'm like, how would you know I was here getting into a car accident? And so on January 27, 2013, I happened to be home in my apartment, waiting for a friend to come by and pick me up because we were going to go to church. And I got a phone call that a loved one had passed. So January 27 was literally 3 days before my birthday. I'm born January 30th. And so I get the phone call. I'm distraught. And as soon as I hang up with my family member about the loved one, he calls. And he can hear that I'm distraught and I'm upset. And he offers to come console me. That's what the word that he used, to come over. And, in the moment, it was one of those against my better judgment. But I was like, fine. So little did I know he was already outside my apartment. And so he comes over, and what was supposed to be a moment of consoling turned into him basically arguing with me about me rejecting him, and how he didn't like that I rejected him, and that he was really offended because he knows he's a great guy. And so it got really uncomfortable real quick. And I remember being like, Yeah, I think it's time for you to go. Like, my gut was telling me something was going to happen. I just didn't know what that something was. And so I kept asking him to leave. And when it looked like he was actually going to leave, that's when he proceeded to grab me and raped me right in my living room. And what felt like an eternity probably was a few minutes. And I could remember him literally saying to me that he was going to make it so that nobody would ever want me. Like, he was going to damage me. So after he rapes me, he leaves. And I remember my very first thing I did, and I know now that was probably something I shouldn't have did, but I got in the shower. Because all I wanted in the moment was his scent and his touch and everything about him to come off of me. So I got in the shower and I'm just scrubbing and I'm scrubbing. And by the time all of this has happened, my friend had just got to my house. And she's like, what in the world happened? And so I proceed to tell her, what happened. And she's like, Leah, you got to call the cops. And again, being a woman of color, I'm sitting here like, who's going to believe that I let somebody in my house and they raped me? So I end up going to church and I end up telling my spiritual mom, who actually was already doing advocacy work. So she actually inspired the advocate in me years ago. But she was already doing advocacy work in sexual assault. And she hugged me and she said, I want you to know it's not your fault. This is not your fault. And so it took a couple of days. But I did call, and I did make the report. And I will tell you, Sarita, I had the worst experience with the justice system. Not only did I deal with a male officer who literally asked me 5 times, was I sure that I was raped? As if I didn't know that. And then I went as far as picking him out of the lineup, doing the rape kit, and that by itself is just a violation all over again,
reliving some of the trauma.
Right. Having to relive and answer the question over and over again. And then we had our first day in court where we were just supposed to be getting a restraining order of protection. And literally I had a white male judge, I'll never forget it, who literally stood on his bench and told me that I was a woman scorned and that he did not believe that I had been raped. And he proceeded to get up off the bench and go in his chambers like, case closed. And I watched as my perpetrator walked out. And I had a breakdown. And I still, to this day, I remember the white male sheriff that literally told me to get it together or he was going to lock me up. Like, imagine that for a moment. You're hurting because you're watching someone violated you walk out scot-free, and the sheriff tells you he's going to lock you up if you don't get it together. So that day, I had to make a choice. I had to decide, was I going to allow this moment to define me, or was I going to define it? And so that moment was the catalyst to start healing and to go through my self-love journey. And I would love to sit here and say that it ended on that day, but unfortunately, June of last year is when I found out that they just tested my rape kit and that it took them 8 years to decide whether or not I was worthy of justice. And so that moment, getting that call June 2021, I literally remember praying and I was like, God, if I got to relive this part of my journey, about my life again, how do I make this bigger than me? And that's when he was like, you need to get into advocacy. And so that's what I did, because I knew if it took 8 years for someone to test the rape kit to bring me closure for something that I knew happened, then I could only imagine how many other people were waiting.
Let's take a moment. I want people listening, and for myself, just to kind of let that all sink in for a second. Thank you so much, Leah, for sharing that. And 8 years was just mind-blowing, awful to me. I can't even imagine. And I really love the question you asked yourself. I mean, Number one, horrific things happen to so many people out there, and it's so unjust and unfair. And I love the question you asked yourself. Am I letting this incident define me, or am I going to define it, right?
Yeah.
It's taking back your power, reclaiming that part. That incident, as horrific as it was and unjust as it was, didn't take everything from you. Mm-hmm. Like that person, no matter what ever happens, no person has any full ability to take everything from you.
Yeah.
And I love that question you asked yourself, and that being your defining moment that helped you decide, like, I want to heal from this, and utilizing your healing to bring it out and to others, and helping others with their journey as well. Because after talking with you for the first time, I had no idea that some people have to wait that long, if not longer, for something like this to get processed. And that is so backwards to me, so backwards. Yeah. So we need people like you doing this type of work. There's something I did want to ask you that was coming up for me, is that because this is a little bit more of a sensitive topic, and something that I think definitely more people need to like hear about and have these discussions. One of the things I love doing in this show is, like, obviously about self-embrace and self-compassion. Mm-hmm. You, Leah, at this present day now, kind of reflecting back at, Leah back then, what words of, like, self-compassion or love, like, would you give to that kind of that old identity, that Leah that went through that, like, really horrific? Because there may be people, like, in this moment that have had something significantly difficult happen, and they just need to have this moment of self-compassion.
Yeah, I think when I think back on that moment, the biggest thing for me was just daily reminding myself that it wasn't my fault. That I didn't do anything, that I didn't cause this. Because for a while I felt guilty. I felt like, what if I didn't let him in the house? What if I didn't answer the call? Like, would this have happened? Right? And so instead of beating myself up, I had to daily remind myself that I didn't do anything wrong. And that was hard at first, because when you think of the circumstances and you think of, well, how else would he have gotten in the house unless you let the door, it's hard to justify. But I think for me, what helped me in that moment was definitely making sure that I started my healing journey instantly, that I didn't wait months or years or whatever to start it. Like, the great thing that came out of that moment was that because I went to the hospital, because I did the rape kit, I was immediately connected to the local rape crisis center. So I immediately had the resources. I had, I was leaving out of the hospital with a date to show up at the rape crisis center to start counseling, which was free for me. So I think if I would have waited, I probably wouldn't have been able to embrace that part, that it wasn't my fault. And so that is probably the biggest thing that I would say I had to tell myself for a very long time, that you did not cause this, that, it was a part of your divine assignment. Like, you wouldn't be able to do what you do now, had you not accepted the fact that, what, God in his infinite wisdom allowed what he allowed, and it created and it sparked the advocate and the activist in me, and the person that continues to fight for others.
Love that. That is so, taking something like that and turning it into something so beautiful. And I absolutely love the aspect of it about not holding yourself with so much judgment, and that it's not your fault, and really going through that process, it sounds like, and I do want to ask you kind of what that looked like, but forgiving yourself, right? Mm-hmm. Because we tend to take on so much. Like, guilt is something, and I know this from my personal life, because I realize that I hold a lot of guilt for a lot of things. And a lot of times that guilt comes from a place of like people pleasing, not wanting things to like rock the boat or, you know, whatever it may be. But I acknowledge that like guilt has been a primary emotion that has been within my container for a long time, like in my body and everything. So learning to release that guilt and forgive yourself, what did that process part look like? Like actually forgiving yourself, because it's one of the hardest things to do, I have to say, right? We hold so much against ourselves.
Yeah, forgiveness was so rough. It was. I'll tell you, the hardest thing outside of forgiving myself that I struggled with for a long time was even learning to want to look attractive again. Like, for a very long time, I would go to my therapy sessions in sweatpants and a sweatshirt. Like, anything to not look appealing to the opposite sex. And I struggled with it. And my therapist, she was so great because she would, like, challenge me to just do little things to regain who I was again. You know, like, go get your nails done. Go get your feet done. You know, get your hair done. Because, like, for me, it was just... what I was telling myself was, if I didn't look good, right, or look attractive, this wouldn't have happened, right? And so really what forgiveness, how I got into the habit of self-forgiveness for myself was really just being honest about the guilt, about the shame, about feeling like I caused this, and then being vulnerable enough to process it, you know, in therapy, and share with my therapist that I really beat myself up about this. It was a journey though. It definitely was not something that happened overnight. I can say 9 years later, I've forgiven myself, and I've even forgiven him, you know, but the journey to doing that was literally every single day, every day of just when those emotions come up, when them triggers come up, just being self-aware and mindful that, you know, you can control this, you know, you can control your thoughts, you can control how you feel like. And really, one thing that helped me the most was really in thinking about thoughts and feelings was just asking myself, like, where's the evidence to back this up? Like, okay. where's like, because, you know, one thing that my therapist used to always say is feelings are not right or wrong. They just are, right? Like they are what they are. But sometimes in our feelings, we go into this downward spiral because we're so busy trying to make it like fact. And I had to learn, like, when I'm feeling guilty or feeling shame, like, where's the evidence? Like, what are some factual things that you've done that warrants these feelings? And when I couldn't come up with the evidence, it was like, okay, so feel it, acknowledge that that's what you feel, but then let's figure out a coping mechanism or a strategy to begin to move on.
Oh, oof, that's so powerful. Yes. Just within that little bit, you're talking about so much that I love every part of it, the forgiveness aspect. And yes, I did want to mention, you know, forgiving the person that actually did did that to you as well. Before we talk about emotions, because I absolutely love what you said about emotions, not giving them like so much logical part, right? Before that, just going back into forgiveness, because I want to touch on this briefly. I got forgiveness explained to me in such a wonderful way that forgiveness is when we are holding a grudge or we're holding this energy against somebody, we're in fact actually holding it in our energetic field in ourselves. It's almost like we are intentionally wanting to drink the poison without knowing, basically. So we've created this poison that we want the other person to feel and to experience, yet we are the ones holding that. And so it really does, like, that. I think that's part of the reason why I brought forgiveness up as like a self-forgiveness, because in reality it's not as much about the other person as it is about ourselves, right? So really releasing that. And I love the things that you were doing, acknowledging that every single day. And it's forgiveness is something that doesn't happen overnight, right? Like it is a process. It takes time for us to release, because it's one incident, yes, can make all the difference, yet a traumatic incident can also lay a ripple effect for us. Just like throwing a pebble at one end of the lake, we're gonna feel it on the other, we're gonna see it on the other side. And I love what you said about emotions, because I'm hoping children are being taught, actually I know that children are being taught a lot better around emotions and feelings and things like this, but I know for people of our demographic, people that are not children in this age, have been taught that emotions are like either good or bad. You're either happy or you're sad, right? Like there's like a black and white, like there's no gray area, when in reality, just like a rainbow, there's a spectrum of different emotions. And we get taught that not to feel a certain way, or we should feel a certain way. And then when we're feeling a certain way, it's kind of like, what do I do in those moments? And because we've been taught to not process our emotions, but identify our emotions and logically think our way out of them, instead of feeling it and just riding that wave, right? I think that's so important.
Yeah, I wasn't always good with emotions. Like, I was probably the person that kept them bottled up. But now, because of my healing journey, like, if I want to cry, I'm gonna cry. If I want to yell, I'm gonna yell. The thing that I've learned about emotions is just not getting stuck in them. Like, feel it, and then, because I'm a business owner, like, one of the things I've always practiced is not bringing that energy into my business. So, like, if I'm having a crappy day, I'm just going to have a crappy day. Like, we're just not going to do anything business related. We're just going to feel what we feel, because I think what we're learning and we're seeing in society today is that more people are being okay with saying, I'm not okay, and knowing that's okay. Like, you don't have to be happy 24/7. Like, it just doesn't happen that way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very unrealistic. There is such thing as like the positive, the toxic positivity, right? Because I've noticed that I've had some friends have said to me, like, just be happy. It's okay, just be happy. And it's all good intentions, right? But it's basically bypassing my emotional state at that moment. Yeah. Really allowing myself to like feel that and embrace it. And you're so right. It's a fine dance that we can, as guides, healers, people that are in these spaces that are assisting people, can give guidance in that aspect, but yet it's yourself that gets the opportunity to figure out what that looks like for you. Like the dance of, okay, now I'm okay to move on to the next, like allowing yourself to feel that emotion, but again, not getting like stuck in that energy long term, because that's when things kind of unravel a little bit. So
for sure.
Yeah. Amazing. And so with that, I want to talk just a little bit about what you do, within as a business owner, because I'm always interested in that. And I know I find it so fascinating that people can be involved and interested and driven and living a purpose, like what you were saying, like a purposely driven life. And it doesn't need to look like just one thing that you do, right? So you being an advocate for sexual assault survivors, being an author, you have like, those are some, your significant other, like there's so many different beautiful aspects of your life. Like, I would love to hear just a little bit more about like your business and your entrepreneurial endeavors and and how that all like ties together. Like, I think that's really cool that it's so amazing how so many facets can come together so beautifully in one person.
Yeah, so it's funny because I don't know if I've ever thought that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. Like, I think I always knew that I didn't want to work for people for the rest of my life. Like, I did know that. I don't think I knew what that meant until probably during the pandemic, where I really spent a lot of time discovering me and realized, like, I love writing books. I like creating courses, like being multifaceted. And I think one thing that society doesn't necessarily do the greatest at when it comes to new business owners and entrepreneurs is encouraging people to tap into all their passions. Like, we hear things like, oh, you got to niche down, you got to niche down, you got to niche down. And it's like, why do I have to? Like, why can't I just be this multifaceted person? And so outside of being an author and an advocate, I definitely do a lot of speaking. I've been blessed to train law enforcement and the Attorney General's office. I've been blessed to be able to speak at different conferences and share my story as a sexual assault survivor and sit at legislation tables and advocate that way. Other than that, I just recently threw filmmaker in the hat. So
Wow.
yeah, so I have an upcoming documentary. It's called The Forgotten Unheard Stories of Black Women in Sexual Assault. And that really came because of my experience and the backlog and really just wanting to talk about sexual assault in communities of color, because I feel like we talk about it, but we don't really talk about it when it comes to communities of color, and I always think to, like, when Tarana Burke started the Me Too movement, a lot of it was for communities of color,
Correct.
And then other races was like, oh yeah, me too. And it was like, can we just have something for ourselves? So it was funny because when I came up with the idea of the documentary, I kind of went back and forth because I was like, oh man, I really don't want to like exclude anybody. And it actually took one of my really close dear friends. She's now my supervisor because I work with her. But she is a Caucasian woman who was like, I literally think you should do it for communities of color because your stories don't get told. And so getting that like validation, I was like, all right, cool. This is what we're going to do. So that releases April of 2023. I definitely coach. So I coach in a variety of different spaces. I definitely help people who are just doing some life coaching work and needing some guidance on figuring out their purpose and their zone of genius. I also I have some courses around the book writing space. So it's funny because when I got into coaching, that's what I did. I was like a writing coach, but it wasn't fulfilling me. It was one of those, like, I was doing it because that's what I was good at. But it was like, what is the thing that really, really fulfills me? And so other aspect of my coaching business is I help in the sector of podcasting and visibility. And so I help teach people how to get more visible, but then also how to start and build and launch their own podcast. So I do a lot of things. And when I'm not doing any of those things, I am a significant other. I'm a bonus mom. I'm a daughter. Aww. Like, I kick it with my friends. I try to do a healthy balance of like life and business. I try to know when to turn it off after a certain time.
Mm-hmm. That's so beautiful. I love that. I'm always so admirational towards people that have their feet in like a lot of different things, or hands, I should say, in a lot of different things, and that light them up. Right? Not just like, oh, I have to do this because I have to make money, but just because it lights you up. That's something I have discovered through getting to know myself better through these journey of self-discovery and self-love for me, realizing that I can do a lot of different things, and those things can be things that I absolutely love doing and not just because I've been told that I have to do them or whatever.
Yeah.
So real quick, what would you say to somebody that maybe is in that place where they're just maybe questioning themselves and like getting into new things because of just something I just said, where it was like, I'm being told that society's telling me, whatever, family, whatever voice outside of themselves is telling, or the critic voice, right, is telling them like, like you can't do that. That's not like your thing, or that's too much on your plate, or whatever it is. Like, what would you say to somebody being you who's like just really loves doing everything that you do?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a few things I would say. I think the first thing I would say, and this is something I tell even my clients, is do it afraid. Like, fear is gonna be there, and one thing I've learned about fear and anxiety is that it is your body's way of letting you know that you need to rely on something higher than yourself to do it. Like,
Love that.
that's my, like, when I'm feeling anxious or fearful, like, say for getting on the stage to speak, it's my way of being like, okay, God, help me, because this is the only way we're gonna get through it. So I would definitely say do it afraid. One of my mantras, and I say it all the time, is like, what's the worst that can happen? I think a lot of times, especially people that have trauma, complex trauma, we have learned to live a life on the edge, and we've learned to live life like always expecting the worst to happen and always waiting for that other shoe to drop. And my healing journey has really shown me and taught me the other shoe never drops. So I've learned, and I said, and it was funny because I said it on my social media yesterday. I said, I've survived 100% of the worst days of my life. And now it is time to thrive through the 100% of the best days in my life.
Ooh,
right?
Because yes,
when you discover that the other shoe never drops, that what's done has been done, you can't go back, you can't change it, right? I think recognizing, like, what is the worst that can happen if you take the leap of faith? You might fail. Cool. Failure is part of the process, right? Like, I tell anybody, I've probably, as a business owner, I've probably shifted about 7 times. And that is okay, because as you grow and evolve and you learn, right? Like, you might start off one way, and then a couple months later, you're like, that doesn't make me excited anymore. Let's go somewhere else. That's the beauty of evolution and always growing, you know? And
yes.
my last thing I would probably say is embrace no. You know, redefine what no means. Like, I tell people, for me, no means next opportunity. Like, if someone is telling me no, that just means that wasn't the opportunity that I was supposed to walk through. And that's cool. Like, next. You know, like, that's the things that I would say.
Oh, that's amazing wisdom. Thank you so much. I needed to hear that too. That was amazing. And I love the analogy of like the shoe dropping, because it doesn't, you're right, we are taken care of, we are provided for. Like, as I look back in my life too, like, I think about that, I'm like, I've always been provided for. I've always like had something to eat, like roof over my head. Going back to what you were saying about evidence, seeing evidence in your reality, like assessing those moments when you are coming to that place of like, yeah, maybe that shoe's going to drop. Looking at the evidence in your life to see the opposite of that, actually, like how so much is happening for you. I truly believe that we sometimes focus on things that we shouldn't be focusing on, so then it becomes so much bigger in our reality. We think it's that much bigger, but when we focus on that gratitude, that forgiveness, it opens up the floodgates for us to really receive so much more. So I love that. Thank you for those words of wisdom.
You're welcome.
Yes. And the last thing I want to ask you, what does self-love is kind of thrown around a lot as a hashtag, I feel like. And sometimes I feel a little, I second guess myself when I use the word self-love, because it is thrown around in pop culture, I guess, so much. But I love to have everybody's just own, like, you know, what is self-love? And, you know, these series are called self-embrace. So it's like showing yourself the compassion and self-love. Like, what does that mean to you, Leah? What does self-love mean to you?
Yeah. So self-love for me is truly embracing the totality of who I am. like the good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent. And I'll tell you, that journey has been so great because there was a time in my life where I didn't even like the woman I looked at in the mirror. And like now, you know, my daily practice is like standing in front of my mirror in all my glory. You know, I wake up to Mary J. Blige's Good Morning Gorgeous, and I sing it to myself.
It.
You know, and that's my way of like starting my day empowered, reminding myself, girl, you got this. If nobody tells you today you got it, you got it. You can do this. But that was not, I could not have done that years ago, you know, because I just didn't like who I saw. So today, self-love is, I embrace the totality of who Leah Forney is. All of her. Flaws and all, triggers and all, you know, parts of her that she's still trying to figure out, all of it. Because what I've learned is you can't leave out pieces of your story because all of it makes up who you are. And when you really try to dishonor one part, you're really dishonoring you. And so I've learned to just love all of her and continue to embrace all of her.
I love that. Oof, I got chills when you're saying all that. I love that. Thank you so much for that reflection of self-love. And I know that is helpful for everybody. Like this whole conversation is helpful for people. So thank you for everything that you're doing in your spaces and all the spaces that you're in. Thank you so much for that. So you're an amazing woman. I'm so honored to have connected with you and get to know you and having you on this podcast. And thank you so much, Leah. It's been a blast.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, love. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you adored what you heard, it would mean the world to me if you took a moment to leave a review on the platform you are listening to this episode on. By doing this, you are helping my mission to impact other women with their healing journeys. If you aren't already following me on social media, make sure to connect with me at Sarita Wellness to get your weekly dose of inspiration. I can't wait to be with you in the next episode, but in the meantime, keep being the amazing you that you are.